welcome to Fiber Trek. My name is Sarah. This is episode 30. It's February 22nd, 2015. As usual, I am being joined by all of the pack. Fern is right here. Chloe's asleep on his bed, as usual. And I think Bella is asleep in front of the wood stove. They will potentially make an appearance, whether it's through their breathing or barking or just moving around. So perhaps you'll get to see them in the background. In the meantime, I'm going to sit here and Fern has suckered me into the perpetual petting. There she is. Good girl. So welcome to new and returning viewers. I'm so glad you're taking some time to join me and support the podcast and the project of Fiber Trek. Thank you for all the connections. Those are always most welcome and very appreciated. As I say, I do my best to get back to each and every one of you, and if you haven't heard from me, go ahead and email me again. Put it at the top of my list, and I'll be sure to answer a question or comment, what have you, within, hopefully, a timely fashion. Today I have introductions, whips, FOs, acquisitions and discoveries, textiles and time and events. It's a glorious day outside. It's going to hit 32 degrees, which is 0 degrees Celsius, I believe. Very excited about that. Probably be able to go down to one layer when I'm walking the dogs. Plan to ski today. Skiing has been absolutely phenomenal. That's Nordic skiing or cross-country skiing. We just got I don't know, looks like maybe 5 inches of powder last night. It's going to be warm today. I might even ski on the ice. So the sledders have been out. Snowmobilers have been out on the ice pushing down trails. So I'm looking forward to getting outside. I do have an exam tomorrow and I've got quite a bit of studying to do, so I thought, I'll get this done early in the morning and I can upload and get edited while I'm studying. Boo. So I would like to welcome Mimi Teacher from upstate New York. She dreams of living in Maine, having visited Castine. It's a glorious little section of the coast. It's very close to where we'll be holding our retreat in July. If you're interested in that, there is a thread in the Ravelry group, Fiber Trek, and you can learn more about what we'll be doing on the bold coast of Maine this summer. Lexi Luther is from Alaska, and she lives in the UK now, and there are sheep everywhere, and I was thinking, how lucky to have sheep everywhere, although Alaska is a pretty gorgeous place, too. So nice that all these landscapes offer something for us crafters, whether it's Kivia in Alaska or sheep in the UK. Dilio from Quebec is a big fan of gray yarn, so welcome to the fold. So happy to have you here. I love all these people that I've been able to connect with. I know a number of you love color and you love natural colors too, and of course I do love color. I think that I have had some color projects, but I just love that this commonality of gray yarn and what that really represents to us. We can talk a little bit more about that in Slow Wool. Mamato from Northeast Pennsylvania, she likes to craft with her kids, and many hands, of course, make light work, but what a great way to create camaraderie and connection with your family, with your children. And I think I commented, it would be great to have kids. I have so many fleeces to process, and if they'd love to do that, and you could bring them in and have more fleeces, and they could card and help manage some of those other steps that I don't always get to do. I love to do. Strid 8 from Massachusetts is a poultry mom, animal lover, recycler, knitter, and sustainability freak. So welcome to the group. I'm curious to know how many poultry children you have. KHG Knits is from Virginia. She is enabled and has lots of crafting support from within the home and her lovely husband, who I'm sure, as she states in her comment, receives the benefits of all that crafting and enabling. B17 is from Quebec. She is a brand new archaeologist, so congratulations. Wants to weave by making a giant rug loom in her backyard with tree trunks. Fascinating. Would love to know or see pictures of that when it can happen. Of course, we'll probably need to wait a few more months for the snow to recede and the ice to thaw. Knit Sing Repeat is Sarah from Colorado. She came to the craft via weaving, and she's on the Front Range, which has I went to Colorado State University, and little did I know back then what a myriad of fiber opportunities were available when I was there. I did visit, there was a yarn store in Fort Collins called Lamb, I can't remember it now, Lamb something. But I would later, as I progressed and I had moved away, would see ads for that in Interweave. And also Interweave had been, I'm not sure if they still are, been based on Loveland, which was the next town over from Fort Collins. Who knew? And then there was the Estes Wool Festival that I never went to. You know, retrospect. Hindsight is 2020. So welcome. Thank you so much for introducing yourself to the thread. Conversations have been happening in the threads aside from these introductions. And one of them we had been talking about was the concept of slow knitting, which had been introduced and I had kind of pontificated on in my last episode. And what had really ended up, that thought had really ended up coming together around my medium and the concept of, you know, what I like to work with. And Freeze Frame commented and linked to a blog by La Lanière about slow wool, which I think really captured what I was trying to articulate, but I wasn't quite able to do. And this concept of slow wool, and I will put a link to this blog, but there were a few quotes that were kind of, you know, captured my attention. One was, it's her own quiet resistance to mass production, slow wool, is a reminder to herself to be more mindful in my making or her making. And really slow wool is a love affair with natural material. And I think all of those things are what compel me to continue to look for these types of yarns. So I think Soulful Stash and slow wool are very similar concepts. They're quiet resistance to something that is en masse or something that is large. And so there are these unique, small batches that create mindfulness around natural materials. So thank you so much, Freeze Frame and La Lanière, for creating a network and a connection there for us. And La Lanière, thank you so much for a lovely articulatory blog post about some of the meaningfulness behind the material we work with. You can check that out on the Soulful Stash Fibercast 29 thread. Other podcasters, other people were commenting about this concept of slow knitting, and a lot of what came out of that was that podcasters, probably more so than most, feel maybe compelled because they're podcasting every week or bi-weekly and they want to show something, and I can totally understand where that comes from. I'm not sure I subscribe to that because, as you will see, the whips look very similar to last week. And one is that there's kind of the rest of us for knitters. There's a few knitters that really crank things out, and then there's the rest of us. And I will definitely lump myself in the rest of us as, and again, harkening back to slow wool and what really drives me in the craft. Many of you had heard this story. I think Louise of Knit British was talking a little bit about why, she was asking people what about the breeds they were interested in their location. So she had noted that a lot of people were interested in the British breeds, but she wanted to know more about breeds from where we were from, or you were from, or the listener was from. And I think, and I started to think about that, maybe expanded that concept a little bit. And for me, again, I continue to relate my craft and the wool to memory and wanting to connect with place. And so because I have spent a lot of time and a lot of happy time on a lambing hill in Scotland or in Orkney, and that's really where I connected with wool. I connected via the animal, via the sheep, and via the process, that these slow wools, these farm yarns, have become more important to me because I'm connecting with a lifestyle. I'm connecting with a memory of a lifestyle that I very much love and appreciate and have always wanted to get back to. So, anyway, slightly unrelated to what Louise was talking about on Knit British, it was a prompt for me to again think more about where I'm coming from with the material that I use and how I source that material. So thank you, Louise, for that prompt. And yeah, so slow wool. I think that would, slow wool, soulful wool. And that's where those concepts are some of the driving pieces behind the work that I do and perhaps that you do. 10 o'clock. So, FOs, let's just go there. I'll let this ding itself out. It's easier than trying to talk over it. So as convoluted as that last section was, kind of a stream of consciousness, things that I've been thinking about, Slow Wool came in, Knit British came in, all of those, we'll try to firm up the content as we move forward. I did want to mention, since I had talked about being inspired by Knit British podcast, I did want to mention that Shiny Bees, and I had posted this on my Instagram feed, she did a interview with Kate Davies on, I think the actual, Kate Davies is in the title. I can't remember the number of the podcast now, but Shiny Bees, interview with Kate Davies, absolutely lovely. Smiled through the whole thing because I was so inspired and so excited to hear Kate's voice. And actually New Hampshire Knits, Claire talks about this in her podcast too, just kind of rounded out this imagery that I've had from her feed, from her blog, and to have this conversation back and forth was just great, and it added so much more dimension to the designs. So she had a great piece of advice, which is take yourself seriously, and I took that to heart in that moment. I was like, all right, we're taking it seriously, we're taking Fabritrek seriously, the greater goals. And it's funny because at that same time Tyler, my partner, was really coming around, my project partner, was really coming around too to taking things seriously, and things are just really wiggling in together, and so very timely and very, very much appreciated that piece of advice. So thank you, Kate Davies, even though you're probably not watching. But thanks, Joe, for eliciting that out of your interviewee. Finished objects, I'm done blabbing. So I had to amp up my game, which is probably why I haven't finished object, for a friend who's having a baby in April, but the shower, of course, is in February. And this is what always happens to me. I'm pregnant, I'm due in June. I'm like, oh, great, I got plenty of time, right? June. But that's not how it works, because there's the shower, and that's when you're technically, or my perception is that you give your gift. I know I could give my gift once they have the baby, and that usually is what happens. But the shower is coming up in February. So I made the Sargis boots by Sarchi de Bruin, and booties. Here they are. It's not going to be. I made them out of Elsa Cormo fingering, and I did them on a size 3 or 3.75 millimeter. This one doesn't have the buttons yet. I don't know if you can actually get a feel for the look because they're pretty dark. And I knit these up very quickly, and they're sweet and lovely. The seaming came together very well. I was able to figure out the buttonhole chain. I used a blog, Trixie Knitter, and she had a really nice blog post about knitting these and how she seamed them. I just whip stitched the bottoms together because I didn't really want a ridge on the bottom. And then I also took her advice about seaming the garter stitch on the back. And I'm really psyched because I was nervous about the seaming. Helen Stewart of Curious Handmade asked, she had a prompt about sweater making because she's delving into this garment crafting. And she wanted to know what our fears were. And so I immediately went over, well, I didn't immediately because I was driving, but came back and said, seaming, here come the ducks. Unbelievable. These ducks fly in from Millinocket Stream in town, probably, I don't know, 6 miles, to eat my birdseed almost every day in blizzards. I don't get it. So I'm sure these are the ducklings that were here this summer, but anyway, sorry, slightly distracted. Anyway, back to Curious Handmade. I went over to her blog and I mentioned that set-in sleeves are my ultimate nemesis when it comes to picking and finishing sweater projects. And I have been avoiding them, which is slightly shameful for me because I will, if I see a project that I like, I'll just do it. But I've had so many instances where I've knit flat sweaters with set-in sleeves and I've just not been happy with the arm seams, that I've just started to not do it because it's so much work and then I'm disappointed in the finishing. So anyway, I went over and I did that. And when I picked these up, I knew I was going to have to seam. And of course, they're short seams. But anyway, I was very happy with how that all turned out. And I'm happy to give this gift. I also did a hat, which is a merino angora from a farm in Bristol, Maine. This is the yarn. She didn't come with a name. I bought it at a local yarn shop. And this is Erica Knight's baby hat. It's from a book, Precious Knitwear for Precious Things. And I did that last night, just so that it's kind of like booties in a hat. So I did that on a size 6, 4mm, and those are done, and those can go out the door. So I'm really happy that that is taken care of. I have on the needles, of course, the same thing. I have windswept on the needles. I made quite a bit of progress. Here it is. This is out of Jamieson's wool in the artichoke colorway. It's Shetland. And I bought this at Church Mouse Tea and Yarn a while ago. And had originally I was going to do the Burnham Wood capelet out of this yarn, but I didn't like the way it knit up. So I think that this project is perfect. Here's hoping that it fits. Note that it is seamless. Very interesting construction. And I'm in the bodice now, so it's going along quite swimmingly, and I can do it quite easily. Except for the lace. I have to look at the chart. The other thing I am just about finished, except for the picot edging, which is slightly scaring me because I'm having a hard time reading the instruction, is the Red Rock Canyon Shawl by Romy Hill, or Rosemary Hill. So everything is done. Everything is done except the bind off. I know. 471 stitches, picot edging, bind off. So I just haven't attempted it yet because I had these other things I wanted to get done, and because the windswept is so easy to do while I'm doing something else, and this is going to take some concentration. So it's ready to go. I just need to find the time. I am coming up to spring break, so I'll have 2 weeks without classes, and that might be the time to invest. I also have on the needles a test knit for Upton Yarns, which is the Miramichi mitts, and I am doing they're fingerless gloves, which I'm doing for the first time. I've never done fingers, so I'm getting ready to do that. And I also need to sit with those instructions so that I can be mindful and give her my information. So I think they're going to sit like this. And there's a cable, which is again pretty dark. This is her Gansey yarn. It's a 5-ply. And I'm knitting these on a size 2, which is a 2.75. I love the texture of this cable, and I love this yarn. I talked about this last time, and I know that Upton Yarns is looking at a sock yarn based on last week's conversation about 100% wool sock yarns, Sans Nylon and Sans Superwash. So anyway, that's on the needles. And of course, my waffle creams are still on the needles out of Serenity Farm Alpaca. This is the finished one, but I'm only like here on the second one. So that's been some school knitting, and that continues to be school knitting. Yay! So that's works in progress. Textiles in Time and Fiber Trek. They kind of go hand in hand this week, and I'll tell you a little bit why. So Fiber Trek is getting ready to shoot with any luck, kind of their, 6 to 8 episodes, and we want around New England and about New England. We're still working on how we're going to do that. If it's going to be thematic stories that go across state lines, or if it's going to be state by state. But right now, we really wanted to start in New England with the Industrial Revolution and the concept of mills. I have contacted the American History Textile Museum, and if any of you have connections to areas or to stories in your state, in New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, I think I got them all. Please email me, because I am looking for stories to tell about textiles, fiber, farms, community, craft, that all kind of focus around the textile industry. Anyway, I'm hoping in my first episode to work with Harrisville Mill, the American Textile History Museum in Lowell, Massachusetts. I got another tip from a viewer about National Park Service managed mill. I know that the Slater Mill in Rhode Island might be of interest to us, and I was thinking about looking at mills in the modern age. So we'll look at these historical mills and then look at where we progressed. Where are we now? So that's all up for exploration and context. Now, I don't know how people are going to receive a contact from me, because of course I'm not funded by a big sponsor. I have no backing. It's just a creative project Tyler and I are really trying to pull together. So that's my main concern, is that people won't take us seriously and therefore won't give us the time of day. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, that being said, I thought I would share with you one of the inspirations behind my thoughts for New England. That is from this book, Reading the Forested Landscape by Tom Wessels. And this is a natural history of New England. I used this book extensively. I taught a humanities class for high school kids, which was a social studies science humanities class. So we did, instead of arts and literature, we did science and cultural history. We looked at knitting, right? So the kids would knit and learn about the history of wool, but they'd also look at natural dyeing and the chemical processes, right? So that's the chemistry and the science part. Anyway, this book was like my Bible for the beginning of our American woolens section. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about pre-colonial New England, what it looked like. And then I want to talk a little bit about what happened and why it looks the way it does today. And that's kind of what he describes in here. So if we think about pre-colonial New England, we're looking at native cultures that were living here. We've talked a little bit about that, I think. But native cultures, even up to 5,000 years ago, were using forest fires intentionally as a landscape management tool. And it was the first landscape management tool used by humans. So they've done archaeological studies and analyzing charcoal in Composa Bog in Stockbridge, Mass. And they have found charcoal from 5,000 years ago. And one of the things that I didn't realize, I'd always pictured kind of picturesque New England and all the trees changing and all these hardwoods, etc., is that it didn't look like that at all when settlers arrived. So native cultures were burning forests, and they were doing that for a number of reasons. One was it controlled for mosquitoes and black flies because it eliminated the leaf litter. So black flies especially like to get underneath the leaf litter. If you've been in New England, or if you've been in areas like Maine, northern Canada, black flies and mosquitoes are atrocious. I think mosquitoes like stagnant water, black flies like running water, and so springtime and all that snow melt, and of course the leaf litter, and underneath the leaves, underneath the trees, they like to hang out. So there's certain temperatures that those insects is optimal for them. So These burns also made it possible to hunt with bow and arrow because it's taking care of leaf litter, right? So you can stalk game quietly without crunching leaves. It is also clearing out understory so you can see. And with that burn, it is also encouraging grasses and herbaceous plants to grow, as well as berries, and it's selecting for fire-tolerant nut-producing trees, all of which are great for the human consumption as well as the wildlife consumption. So you can see that symbiotic relationship working, right? So we're burning, we're bringing in wildlife, we're able to hunt wildlife and with the technology that we had, and then we were also able to procure and gather our own foodstuffs. So, so the pre-colonial fire-managed woodlands looked very different. They looked, when people arrived, they would have seen massive, massive hardwoods, canopy over this forest floor that was carpeted with grasses and berry bushes. It was very park-like, and that's not what it looks like today. So the fire management tool was lost with colonization, and as they came in, people were moving towards cultivating and agriculture, and that looked very different. So I wanted to read an excerpt from the book called Sheep Fever, which is so fascinating. He also writes a lot about stone walls and how to look at the forested landscape. So you can, was this a pasture? Was this hay? Was it cultivated? You can tell that by the types of stones and the stone walls. It's really fascinating. I'd highly recommend it. He wrote one about granite as well. So sheep fever. So before losing to Napoleon, the Portuguese aristocracy had bred a special kind of sheep called Merino. And I'm not going to read this particular section, but that Merino was coveted, and there was a worldwide demand for the wool, and the Portuguese wouldn't release the breed. However, when Napoleon defeated the Portuguese, that door opened up, and in 1810, William Jarvis, the American consul to Portugal, imported 4,000 of the Merino sheep to his Wethersfield farm in Vermont. And then now I'm going to read it because it just gets too fascinating and convoluted for me to tell you the story. So this was something I had the kids read, this article. Following the War of 1812, the U.S. government imposed a tariff law on English goods, including woolens, and a 30-year period of sheep fever took hold of central New England. In his book, Social Ferment in Vermont, 1791 to 1850, David Ludlam writes, "A wool craze swept the region, a mania as powerful as any religious fanaticism. Between 1810 and 1820, the number of textile mills in the region processing merino wool multiplied threefold. With the increased demand for wool came a dramatic rise in the merino population. By 1824, Vermont's 4,000 sheep had increased to 475,000. By 1836, its sheep population hit 1.1 million, reaching a peak of 1.7 million in 1840. The same trend took place in New Hampshire, with a peak of more than 600,000 sheep by 1840. To support all of these sheep, the landscape changed dramatically. The majority of the countryside was cleared of forests to create pasturage, and few sites were excluded from this process. Steep hillsides, ridgetops, and even heavily bouldered areas were used. By 1840, approximately 75% of the region's landscape had been converted to open land for agricultural use, the bulk of it in sheep pasture. Extensive stone fencing designed to keep the sheep in their pastures also began to crisscross the landscape. Prior to 1810, the majority of fences were made of wood. Stump fences were eventually replaced by split rail, zigzag fencing. But with the loss of forest, wood for fencing became scarce, and piles of rock that had been removed from agricultural land became a new resource for fence construction. When the stones were close at hand, the industrious settlers could lay 10 to 20 feet of stone wall a day. To contain sheep, the walls had to be 4.5 feet high. Often wooden rails or even brush was laid on the stones to add to the wall's height. Maintaining high fencing was enforced by law, as free-roaming sheep could ruin people's crops. Fence wardens patrolled townships, and fines for inadequate fencing were common. Because the bulk of these stone fences were built in a 30-year period between 1810 and 1840, and the mass of stone in these walls was greater than that of the Great Pyramids of Egypt, it seems fair that central New England's stone fences be considered the eighth wonder of the world. The great irony of this Herculean effort to clear the land and surround it with stone walls was that this pastoral landscape was exceedingly short-lived. By 1840, the sheep farms were being abandoned in a wholesale fashion. By 1900, more than half of the cleared land was growing back to forests, shrouding thousands of miles of stone walls like the one seen in the etching at the beginning of this chapter. Now, I am very familiar with stone walls. They were behind my house. They are at my parents' house. Those of you who live in New England are very familiar with stone walls as well. And I love that contextual piece. 1.7 million sheep, more stone than in the Great Pyramids. It's a big industry. The thing about this, as well as when he talks about moving away, when we moved away from sheep, we were kind of replaced by dairies. The industry, the development of the mills brought women off of the farms. The train systems were set up. So if you look at the spill of that economy, sheep demand woolen mills, demands transportation, etc., etc. So that industrial progression and what it did across the gender gap and how it impacted the landscape. So the Old Man in the Mountain, those of you who are familiar with that in New Hampshire or have visited the Whites or any of the mountain ranges, the Green Mountains, all of that exposed granite is because sheep were on those peaks, those steep hillsides. All of that's been eroded away because of the agricultural history of this area. All of that wood that was cleared, everything that was cleared, pine, hardwood, softwoods will not regenerate. I believe pitch pine will regenerate, but your red pine, your white pine, a lot of the original coniferous forests don't regenerate, and those were cut and cleared. What does regenerate after it's been cut is birch, beech, maple, oak. Hardwoods will regenerate, right? So these trees regenerated. We're 80% more forested now than we were 100 years ago. I think it's some statistic like that. And the reason that is that we have these gorgeous fall colors is because of all the land clearing that happened. Anyway, just really fascinating to look at all those layers of development. Napoleon beating the Portuguese, Merino coming into Vermont, woolen mills going up, the crash of that market, the depletion of farmland, the shift in the whole economy of New England from a production manufacturing economy to a service economy where we are now. It's just fascinating to me. I don't know if he has anything else. Okay, so I'll give you this little bit. The impact of 19th century sheep fever is still around us. In many places, sheep pastured on ridge tops caused massive erosions that exposed extensive bedrock, much of it still visible more than a century later. Although erosion followed blowdowns and fire can also create bare outcroppings of rock, a large percentage of the exposed bedrock found in the region today owes its presence to past overgrazing by sheep. Just a mass migration into central New England followed the end of the French and Indian Wars, so did a mass exodus to the west Just as a mass migration into central New England followed the end of the French and Indian Wars, so did a mass exodus to the west begin as New England farming families looked for greener pastures. The decline of farm productivity in New England fueled the development of transportation routes to the rich and unglaciated soils of the Ohio River Valley. The Erie Canal was opened in 1825, and rail service to the west followed shortly thereafter. By 1850, 100,000 Vermonters, almost one-half the state's population, had moved west. Orford, New Hampshire, which had a peak population of 1,829 people in 1830, dropped to 1,406 by 1850 and to 916 by 1890. This trend was widespread throughout the region. In fact, Most rural towns in central New England presently have fewer residents than they did in 1840. Fascinating. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to paint a little picture of New England in the United States and its history with sheep. It really was where it began. And that is hopefully the initial story that Tyler and I are going to tell as we start Fiber Trek. So I would highly recommend this book. He has a lot more to say. Reading the Forested Landscape by Tom Wessels. Those of you who live in New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, I'm sure you can relate to a lot of what he has to say. Right, Soulful Stash swap, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. So a Soulful Stash is a swap that I am participating in with Claire of New Hampshire Knits. And we currently have room in the swap for, I believe, 4 or 5 more people. We had originally said 10, but we've opened it up to 15 or 20. So if you are still interested, there is room in both groups. You can go over to New Hampshire Knits and join her group, and you can certainly join the swap there. And I would highly encourage you to listen to her podcast. She has a lot of information to impart. And the resource list for suggestions is growing in both groups. So if you're not quite sure what a Soulful Stash might look like or slow wool might look like, you can certainly start with a resource list there, and you can certainly add to that list. Certainly not going to be all, cover everything. So that was actually the hope, is that as people found these interesting soulful yarns, they would create links, create connections so other people could find them as well. I am going to be working with Claire to pair people up. So we're going to give that maybe another week, and then see where we're at. So if you're interested, please go ahead over there, and you can read all the details in the thread for the swap. I'm going to be at Spa next weekend, just checking it out and scouting it out with my friend Sarah from Upton Yarns. And I'm also going to be at New Hampshire Sheep and Wool, the Fiber Frolic, and the Common Ground Fair. I'm sponsoring 2 retreats right now. One will be in July with Tidal Tours, Islands of Wool. You can find more about that, as I said in the thread. And Highlands on the Fly retreat will be happening at the New England Outdoor Center outside of Millinocket, Maine, October 17th. That week, it's the same weekend as Rhinebeck, I know. But there are people who don't go to Rhinebeck. And for those of you who need a little consolation that you're not going to Rhinebeck, you can come to the retreat in northern Maine. We had to do that because Knit East is the following weekend in Nova Scotia. I think it's St. Andrews, Nova Scotia. And Heather of Highland Handmaids, who I co-sponsor the retreat with, is vending. So we're just going to work with the date we have and hope that if you're interested and doesn't conflict with Rhinebeck plans, that you'll check out Highlands on the Fly. There is a retreat group on Ravelry, Highlands on the Fly, and I will be posting in that shortly. I think with that, I'm going to say a fond farewell. I always leave out something, and then I feel, I forgot to tell you, acquisitions and discoveries. Very important. I have been wanting this yarn for a very long time. It is a Blacker yarn. It's the original Blacker yarn how I found Blacker. Well, I found Blacker, I think, via Kate Davies, and then I saw this yarn, and then I was like, Blacker yarn down the rabbit hole. But I took a tip out of B. Mandarin's book, and I was cruising stashes one night and found this on a D-stash in the United States. So the shipping was included in the price, which was excellent. And it is the St. Kilda lace. It's Bore, Soya, and Shetland. All 3 are island breeds, 2 of which have ancient overtones, if you will, and make this very attractive in a very soulful way for me. So I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it yet. But another providential sign that it was meant to come to me was it came with this design, kind of a kit, which is by Elizabeth Lovick, who is from Orkney. So obviously, she lives in mainland Orkney. Obviously, this was meant to live with me and come to be a part of my stash. So I'm not 100% sure. I was just thinking there for a moment what I was going to do with that. The other thing I forgot to mention is that a dear friend of mine made me this lovely bag out of flannel, which is so perfect because it's been very cold. And she is a devoted attendee of the Highlands on the Fly retreat who lives in the southeastern part of the United States. And I always kind of bemoan, and this goes for all of the connections I've made, that they live far away. I see them once a year. I never get to see them. And I'm sure she's not bemoaning that fact that she doesn't live in Maine right now because we have like 8 feet of snow on the ground. But I was very much appreciative. I very much appreciated the thought, and she sent me some stitch markers. So it was a great way to connect, even though we're not neighbors, which I think sometimes we so wish we were. We need to like create a resort that's kind of centrally located where people can, you know, fly in and meet, and it's kind of like a knitter's resort, and you can see people. I don't know, I'm going off on a wild tangent that is not well formed, not an idea that's well formed. I guess that's why they have festivals. Anyway, it's just poignant to me that these friends live all over the world, the country, and the connection is via fiber, and I never get to meet or see some of them. So that was really it for acquisitions. That's all the yarn candy I have for you. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a bit convoluted, but I am thinking a little bit about my exam tomorrow. So I think on that note, with my non-snaggy tagline out, I'm just going to say bye.